Hey everyone, what's up? The Russian Championship has officially come to an end. First, we talked about the final series, and now it's time to talk about the battle for the bronze medals, which went all the way to 5 matches. And in the end, Lokomotiv Novosibirsk came out on top. As usual, this won't be a detailed breakdown of every single match. I just want to focus more on the details. First of all, of course, I want to congratulate Lokomotiv's fans. No team in Russia had better support, that's for sure. Every single home match for their team ended in a sellout. And even in Game 5 of the Bronze Series in St. Petersburg, their fans simply outshouted the local crowd and created the feeling of a home arena. And the Railwaymen themselves were probably the brightest team of the season in Russia. Even though I'm not their fan, their game left nobody indifferent. And playing the maximum possible number of matches in every playoff series. That's just something unbelievable. But now let's finally talk about the Bronze Series. The script of this series can be described like some classic martial arts movie. First, the good guys, despite a very tough tournament, start winning thanks to emotion and mentality. Then the villain uses a dirty trick and takes over the momentum, but the good guy somehow finds the strength to win and finishes the tournament on a high note. Zenit fans, forgive me, but their team became the bad guy here. It looked like, despite being exhausted both physically and mentally, Lokomotiv turned Game 1 around purely on character, and it seemed like things would only get worse from there for the St. Petersburg squad. And that's almost exactly how it played out. But then the psychological tricks came into play. Pakshin appears on the court, takes on the role of the instigator and keeps provoking Lokomotiv's players, while Kosmin once again remembers his very strange serve with a pause. And here I'll just say my opinion. Not everything that is allowed by the rules of the game fits the rules of fair play. We'll come back specifically to Maxim a little later. For now, I'll finish the short recap of the series. So, through psychological pressure and thanks to Moni Nikolov's injury, Vladimir Alekno's team turns Game 2 around from 0-2 and takes the win. Riding that same wave, they also win the first away match in Novosibirsk. But even then, the local fanbase was already laying the foundation for future victories. In Game 4, that same Kosmin simply no longer knew how to deal with his own serve. Pakshin was no longer as convincing and bold, and Loko had already left behind the series against Zenit Kazan and the disappointment of not reaching the final and set a direct course toward the bronze medals. In the end, they got a confident win in the second home match, and then a straight-set victory in the decisive 5th match, where the Novosibirsk fans outshouted the homestands and put pressure on Zenit's players. And now let's break this matchup down in a bit more detail, and I'd like to start with Plamen Konstantinov. The Bulgarian specialist revealed himself in a new way for many people. Yes, he has always been quite eloquent and straightforward, but now his figure has reached a new level of attention. Almost every post-match interview he gave during the playoffs could be broken down into quotes, and his comments during timeouts also left a positive impression, and the way his team's roster developed throughout the season despite all the difficulties shows that Lokomotiv's coach did an excellent job. And against that background, Vladimir Alekno, with all due respect to him, no longer looks quite as convincing. And here I'd like to start from a little further back. For a long time, Zenit was seen almost as a laughingstock, a team with huge ambitions and, to some extent, an unlimited budget, but one that still couldn't win anything truly serious. And then it seemed a great coach arrives. The team's game transforms in a short period of time, and even Zhenya Grebennikov didn't immediately decide to change clubs, but instead chose to work with Alekno in the hope of finally winning long-awaited trophies in Russia. Zenit stopped being a source of memes and jokes and seemed to be entering a new stage of development. But what did we see this season? Now, because of the head coach's figure, Zenit's reputation is starting to deteriorate sharply. Referees are forced to change their decisions, listen to open criticism directed at them. The regulations are periodically violated, but no sanctions follow. And the Bronze Series became the cherry on top, where it was obvious that the head coach chose a questionable battle strategy, even if in war all means are fair. And tactically Zenit looked very pale. At times it felt like they had not prepared for the opponent at all, or had prepared in the wrong way. At times Marlon Jan's presence on court looked extremely unjustified. Yes, he had a very strong 5th match, but throughout the playoffs he definitely lacked consistency. and it probably didn't exactly fire up his competitive spirit considering that he still wasn't subbed out no matter how badly he played. And from the topic of coaches and partly tactical breakdowns, I'd like to move on to Simeon Nikolov. And through his example, you can see how Zenit Kazan prepared for the semi-final. Most of his moves were red, so he had to do something unconventional. And that didn't always work. Sometimes it all came down to the quality of the sets simply dropping. And Plamen Konstantinov was forced to replace his setter. Yes, I risk bringing the anger of Simeon's fans upon myself because he really does have a big and loving fan base, but I sincerely believe that he had a fairly mediocre series against Zenit Kazan. Again, not without the opponent's influence. And I've already pushed this joking topic several times, that surely in the matches against Zenit Saint Petersburg he would deliver his prime version, and in a season or so he and his brother Alex would be bought out from Luba on a big salary. And honestly, it feels like those thoughts do carry some weight. There were rumors that the Nikolov brothers could already end up in the northern capital of Russia next season. Vladimir Nikolov came to St. Petersburg for the Russian Super Cup, and he also unexpectedly, at least for the club, flew to Novosibirsk for the round 29 match against Zenit. And if we remember that the father of the family is also an agent, then all of this no longer looks like just a coincidence. But anyway, in the bronze series everything really worked beautifully for Moni, except that the injury spoiled the picture a little and stretched the series out. But it wasn't for nothing that Vladimir Alekno noted after Game 5 that a Nikolov made the difference, which we also add to our conspiracy theory about his move to Zenit. Simeon often liked to play through the middles at Lokomotiv, and here the opponent's block didn't prevent him from doing that at all, which later also led to a pipe show, so Plamen Konstantinov's team really looked bright in the bronze series. Moni played great, no questions there, but what concerns did I have about him before these matches? Let's remember the World Championship final, where Nikolov gave up his signature style of play and performed the role of a regular setter, which ultimately led to a match without scoring a single point, and that's a very rare case in the young Bulgarian's career. And during the playoffs this season, I started noticing that Moni was very modest and cautious when it came to his attacking game. And that was genuinely scary, because that was his signature style. And it's not just about having some highlights, it's a real threat for the opponent. I talked about this about a year ago after the friendly tournament in Poland. If he can properly integrate his attack into the combination game and not just turn on blind rage mode, then this will be a problem for absolutely any opponent. And by the end of the bronze series, Moni really got down to business, and that seriously changed the balance of power in this matchup. Yes, there were a few crazy attacks, but they didn't feel out of place at all. They only emphasized his threat at the net and his uniqueness. So I hope he doesn't lose his identity and keeps developing in this direction. Because we shouldn't forget that he himself talked about this on podcasts. He has no intention of giving it up and will make it the foundation of his unique style. And before we move on, share your thoughts on the performance of the 19-year-old Bulgarian prodigy. And you don't have to focus only on the bronze final. You can draw conclusions based on his entire Russian Championship campaign. As always, I'll be very interested to hear your opinion. But with the Zenit setters, the situation is interesting. There are two directions. Either the whole team plays, but Vladislav Babkevich suffers a little, or the whole focus goes to the opposite, but then the other attackers have to wait for their turn. I don't really see the point in going into detail about either Igor Kobzar's or Igor Tisevich's game. Both showed their level and played according to the coaching staff's tasks, at least as it seems to me. Really, they don't create any outstanding emotions. In other words, they didn't play badly and they didn't play brilliantly. They really showed their level, although at times Igor Kobzar produced some attacking performances, outshining Moni Nikolov. But again, all of that was episodic. You know, I'd rather talk specifically about Zenit's game structure, namely the emphasis on Vladislav Babkevich. And here, an example from the world of the National Basketball Association is probably relevant, where there are stars who put up truly outstanding numbers in the regular season, but in the playoffs, considering that defense works completely differently there and teams are analyzed completely differently, those stars can no longer demonstrate the same magnificent game. But again, using the playoffs as an example, we can see that for more than one season now, at the highest stages, Babkevich has not managed to shine the same way he does in the regular season. Let's remember Lokomotiv's matches against Zenit, where he showed truly cosmic numbers with a high attacking efficiency. But this is the playoffs. Here, a team can fully prepare for an opponent within a series. If something suddenly doesn't go according to plan, they can adjust and change things throughout all the remaining matches. And it's much easier for the opponent to adapt to the game of your main star than for that main star to constantly rebuild his already familiar volleyball style during the match. You can say Babkevich is playing badly. Yes, he is still playing at the very highest level, but for Zenit to win within this game structure, he needs to produce superhuman numbers all the time. Again, as the playoffs show, that doesn't happen. The example was last year's final series against Kazan, and now accordingly the bronze series against Lokomotiv. And probably Zenit's main problem, both Babkevich's presence and how much he is used, is that the other players don't feel their importance within this project. Psychologically, it's hard to always be the second or third option, and in fact there probably isn't even a second option. There's Babkevich, then there are options 3, 4 and so on. And again, you have to understand that Marlon Yant has his privileges, and under almost no circumstances will he be replaced. So it's extremely difficult psychologically for the other outside hitters to fit into such a system and truly unlock their potential. And it was specifically because of their potential that Dainekin, Pakshin and Bocharov were brought here, but as you can see, they still can't show themselves in peak condition. And since I've brought up a Roman Pakshin, it's probably worth talking about him too. Yes, many will say that because of this dirty hype around him, people are now talking about him. While before that he was nobody. But of course those who followed Russian volleyball, those who followed his matches with Kosbas, understood that this player really knows how to handle the ball. And unfortunately in this series, he played the role of this tough guy, so to speak. He came on during the second match of the series, started constantly provoking the opponent, and again the referees barely reacted to it at all. And on top of all that behavior, he also produced a good level of volleyball. And when everything is going great for you and you are also provoking the opponent, who starts making mistakes because of it, then naturally you're going to be in a great mood. Naturally the team, especially the head coach, who I am sure came up with all of this, will be proud of you. And to some extent it even worked in the first match in Novosibirsk, but you have to understand what kind of pressure Lokomotiv's fans put on Zenit, and specifically on Pakshin. His game was no longer going quite so well, and his provocations no longer looked quite so obvious. And then, as the series went on, they gradually just started disappearing, because when you're being pressured that hard and you're not playing at the best level, then obviously doing empty provocations becomes extremely problematic. And what probably surprised me the most, when Pakshin wasn't on court, someone still had to provoke the opponent, and that fate fell to Vladislav Babkevich. Before this, I honestly hadn't really noticed him in any conflict situations at all. In general, he's not exactly the most emotional volleyball player, let's put it that way, but here a couple of times he somehow tried, in a forced and artificial way, to get into conflicts with the opponent, and of course, yes, it really looked extremely strange. And yes, of course, we'll talk about Maxim Kosmin and his serves. Here, opinions were definitely split. On the one hand, the rules don't seem to ban these pauses before the serve, but these new amendments about being allowed to change the rotation after the toss. Well, the toss didn't actually happen, so it should be called as a violation. In some places it was called and in others it wasn't. Well, if it's not forbidden, then why not use it? And someone else naturally believed that this was unsportsmanlike behavior, and in many leagues, including Italy, it was banned and equated with unsportsmanlike play, and for such actions you could be given a yellow card. Accordingly, that's why we didn't see such tricks during those matches. But right now I'm not even going to talk about that. Again, I'm 100% sure that this was not entirely Maxim's decision. Yes, maybe at the start of the season he used it himself. And then Vladimir Alekno simply noticed this little trick and decided to use it at the most inappropriate moment. And what is probably the most frustrating thing is that Maxim actually has a good serve. It's quite hard to receive, especially when it's flying properly, so using him specifically for this purpose wasn't entirely logical. In reality, he himself was losing using his serve, his maximum level, and the level most suitable for the situation. Yes, this was more about psychological pressure, but again, the way the fans in Novosibirsk ate him alive is just impossible to put into words. Because of that, he simply started making mistakes. And he no longer even understood how to just put the ball into play, let alone use those fake tricks. Yes, in St. Petersburg they had to resort to it again, and there was a very telling shot where Vladimir Alekno approved it. And again, you could see from Maxim that he himself didn't really want to do it that much. And at the same time, it was even symbolic in a way that this bronze series ended specifically on Kosmin's serve. But again, it seems to me that the middle blocker became a hostage of this situation. And it's not like I'm trying to somehow clean up Maxim Kosmin's reputation right now. Well, he did it. There's no point denying that. But again, I suggest not dumping all the blame on him. There really was some kind of coaching staff idea here, no doubt about that. On a human level, I even feel a little sorry for him. Again, Chenya Grebennikov played the series at a consistently high level. Of course, losing a player like that, a player of that class, is something simply irreplaceable. Probably one of the few, and maybe even the only libero who influences the game so much. It's a shame, of course, that he wasn't able to win trophies in Russia, but it will be extremely interesting to watch him in Japan and see what interesting things he can show there. But again, yes, there is a slight aftertaste. That little French trait from the time of the Home Olympics still wakes up in him. He also loves constantly arguing with the referees, and that definitely doesn't make him look good. But again, it has absolutely no effect on the level of his game. And now I'd probably like to give more attention to Lokomotiv's players. Yes, I've already talked about Moni Nikolov, so now I'd like to move on to Ilya Kazachenkov. It's not exactly like everything worked out for him last season. Plus, Rajab looked excellent in the Russian Cup, and it already seemed like he would take the starting opposite spot for the Novosibirsk club. But Ilya delivered a tremendous performance this season. Yes, there were rare matches where something didn't work for him, but again, Rajab could cover for him there. But the majority of the matches, even at the highest and most important level, Ilya played simply magnificently. And he scored not only from comfortable and fast sets, but also often killed some unbelievable attacks, against a triple block from out-of-system balls. So his contribution to the team's achievements this season definitely carries weight. I was incredibly interested to see how the very tall Moni Nikolov would interact with very tall middles, because before this, of course, he hadn't really had to work with guys like that. And it genuinely came as something of a surprise to me that for a large part of the season, it often seemed like the guys didn't have enough height for the attack. But thankfully, by the bronze final, of course, they found their optimal condition. And they really showed the full power of the Novosibirsk middle blockers' attacks. It will be very interesting to see how things develop at this position next season, since Ilya Skurkaev is moving to Zenit Kazan, and it would seem there is Yuri Brazhnuk, but we shouldn't forget about his, let's say, delayed move to Dynamo LO, although many thought he was actually part of the package in the exchange for Fedor Voronkov. Again, we all understand perfectly well what Dima is capable of, but the way Euro played also deserves separate attention. Ilyas couldn't help the team in the final series of the season, while Brazhnuk showed himself brilliantly, and basically, the absence of a truly key figure in the railway men's rotation was not noticeable. Well, since I mentioned Fedor Voronkov, let's move on to him. Of course, for many people he became the discovery of the season. Fedya has constantly been moving around top clubs, but the way he opened up at Lokomotiv is genuinely something impressive. And with slightly insider information, I can share that many clubs said he was a really difficult personality, with a difficult character, that he was hard to work with. But in Novosibirsk he fit in like he was one of their own in absolutely every area, and not only in terms of volleyball, but also in creating content, which the Novosibirsk club's social media actively does. And he was probably brought in simply as a replacement for Sam Diro, who had health problems, but in reality it turned out that he became a main rotation player and truly made a huge contribution to Lokomotiv's achievement in the final part of the season, and he will surely still help them in the Russian Cup. But again, the Belgian outside hitter also deserves a separate mention, because we all understand perfectly well that Sam had cancer and he was out. It seemed like he was already done for the rest of the season and simply wouldn't be able to help his team. But he made every effort, with enormous support not only from the Novosibirsk fans, but from the entire volleyball community around the world. And he went through a huge journey in the shortest possible time and not only managed to recover but also even helped the team in the bronze series. In the first matches, his influence was genuinely big, although of course it's clear that he wasn't ready to go 100% through all 5 matches. But again, that doesn't cancel out his insane contribution to the atmosphere and to the team's results. Bravo, Sam! We're waiting for you. Waiting for your brilliant performances in the coming seasons too. Again, probably against the background of Genya Grebennikov, you can't admire the Novosibirsk team's liberos in quite the same way, but it's still worth noting a Lokomotiv's excellent pair, specifically an interchangeable pair, Semyon Krivichenko and Sergei Melkozerov. They also do their job wonderfully and, when needed, were ready to cover for each other. So their participation in the team's success naturally cannot go unmentioned either. And I really want to wish Omar Krovanov not to slow down, because what he showed in the semi-final against Zenit Kazan was truly magnificent. Volleyball of the highest level, insane power and insane potential, which I hope Lokomotiv's outside hitter will not lose, and will at least maintain. And maybe even take to a new level, because again, there are memories of Rajab's game in the final part of last season's Russian Cup, and this year he somehow didn't manage to cement that level. I really hope the same fate does not happen to Omar. It will be extremely interesting to watch Lokomotiv next season, considering the huge roster changes, so it feels like we will have to tune in to the Railwaymen's matches from scratch again, waiting to see what exactly they're going to show us. What place do you think Plamen Konstantinov's team will take next season? And also make sure to drop a like under this video and share your thoughts on the past season. Which team stood out to you the most, which players did you follow most closely, and how did you like the Russian season overall? I'll be very interested to hear your opinion. And with you, as always, it was Nick. Love what you do and you will definitely succeed. See you soon. Bye.